Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today is our consecutive English language program. Today's guest is Elias Gerasulis. Elias Gerasulis is representative of the Livingston Group, otherwise known as TLG, is a lobbying firm and is the lead lobbyist of the National Democratic Alliance in Washington, D.C. Mr. Gerasulis received his undergraduate degree from the University of Pennsylvania. He has worked as an advisor to permanent mission of Greece at the United Nations. Mr. Gerasulis thereafter served as Director of Legislative Affairs at the American Hellenic Institute, AHI, a lobby and think tank focused on strengthening U.S.-Greece and U.S.-Cyprus relations, encouraging greater United States engagement in the Eastern Mediterranean, an area of growing geopolitical importance and significance. Mr. Gerasulis, on behalf of AHI, worked with officials in the Congress, the State Department, White House, in the furtherance of this policy mission. He successfully lobbied for and promoted several legislative measures in the Congress that strengthened U.S.-Greece relations and upgraded U.S.-Cyprus relations, supported energy development in the Eastern Mediterranean, and provided official congressional recognition of 3+1 alliance between Greece, Israel, and Cyprus in conjunction with the United States. In addition, Mr. Gerasulis organized an official congressional briefing in 2020 under the auspices of the House Foreign Affairs Chairman to highlight the benefits of energy triangle formed between Greece, Israel, and Cyprus. Mr. Gerasulis joined the Livingston Group in the fall of 2021 and brings to the firm a multifaceted foreign policy and international background. TLG is one of Washington, D.C.'s most powerful and prestigious lobbying firms, founded by former Congressman Bob Livingston. Mr. Gerasulis, as lead lobbyist for TLG, played a key role in arranging for congressional hearings on the plight of Artsakh, also known as Nagorno-Karabakh, as well as coordinated the well-publicized trip of Colonel Safilyan to Washington, D.C. in April 2023. So Mr. Gerasulis this was the introduction. If you find to add certain things to it, please feel free to do so. But I will go to our...
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I just want to say what an honor it is to be on this program, Mr. Yanugian, and I thank you for this opportunity. As you alluded to, our firm was founded back in 1999 by former Congressman Bob Livingston, who served in the House of Representatives for 22 years, was chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and in 1998 was elected as Speaker of the House of Representatives. In 1999, he left Congress to start the Livingston Group. Our firm has become one of the best-known firms in Washington, D.C., in particular when it comes to the area of foreign relations. Our firm has advocated or lobbied on behalf of many countries and international associations and so forth. So our firm has a long and successful track record, and we have many colleagues in our firm with tremendous expertise and understanding of the U.S. government. I've spoken about Bob Livingston. We also have the managing partner, Alan Marn, who was Bob Livingston's chief of staff in the Congress, who's been politically involved since the 1970s. We have other careerists who are colleagues of ours. So between my many different colleagues, we have decades, if not even hundreds of years of experience worth of in the area of government relations. So that helps us in our efforts to produce results for our clients. And I just want to say what an honor it is for us and for myself personally to represent NDA, which is a very noble cause. And it's something that we are very happy, and I'm very happy to be involved with.
Thank you, Mr. Gerasulis. And with our questions that I have prepared for you, we're trying to clarify some things that are still unclear to our general public as far as lobbying is concerned and all that. So, Mr. Gerasulis, many of our compatriots do not necessarily understand the distinction between lobbying and community advocacy, where mistakenly the community advocacy was given the misnomer of Armenian lobby. Can you explain the role of lobbying firms such as Livingston Group and the difference between lobbying firms and community advocacy groups?
Excellent. This is an excellent question, Mr. Yanugian. I thank you for asking this question. And you're right, it is a misnomer. In fact, when I was, as you mentioned, Director of Legislative Affairs at the American Hellenic Institute, we were always careful to say we are not the Greek lobby, we are a Greek American advocacy group. And so this is a distinction I'm very familiar with and I could speak to because I've been on both sides. You know, I'm with a professional lobbying firm, but I've also been with a community advocacy group. So this is something I could speak to. In the case of a lobbying firm like the Livingston Group, a lobbying firm helps a client navigate the political process similar to how a law firm helps a client navigate the legal process. So with a lobbying firm, a client, let's say in this case NDA, hires a lobbying firm in order to navigate the political process. Typically, lobbying firms are created by people with tremendous government experience, whether they be, in our case, former member of Congress Bob Livingston, or they could be former administration officials, other high-level individuals. They come together and they create lobbying firms, and the advantage a lobbying firm provides and the value that a lobbying firm provides is on several fronts. Number one is access. You know, when you have a former member of Congress, you have someone who has served with people who are still in the Congress. You're dealing with someone who has an existing reputation in Washington. So they have a very special level of access. Now, let me be clear. That doesn't necessarily always guarantee that, that we'll get everything we want, but at least we could get our foot in the door on behalf of our client and make the most persuasive case possible. But also because you're dealing with people who have government relations background, in addition to access, it's also providing expertise and understanding of how the government process works, and understanding of who all the different personalities are, as well as high-level expertise. So a lobbying firm brings in a lot of different value-added components, which can significantly elevate the cause of a client. A community advocacy group is different. Community advocacy group is usually supported by the grassroots of community, let's say the Greek American community, the Armenian American community. It is funded by the community donations. This group, this advocacy group, has a very specific mission, right? It's either to, promote, U.S.-Greece relations, or in the case of Armenian community, it's to promote the interests of the Armenian American community. So it's an organization that's more grassroots directed. They have a very specific focus, and it's advocacy. It's more of the grassroots component of trying to influence the U.S. government. That's different from lobbying, which is more insider access, people who are former members of Congress. It's very different. Now, I'm not saying one is superior to the other. I think both are extremely valuable. And I think for the Armenian cause, it would be extremely beneficial if Armenians had both lobbying firms and advocacy groups. And if you had both, I think that could act as a force multiplier.
Right. I can deduce from what you said and the comparison that you brought when someone hires an attorney. So the attorney is the lobbying group, while the advocacy group is similar
You
to
know,
a close
money or
relative,
resources to add.
who cares about your issue. So he has his heart in it. So he's doing everything he can to help you, but he's not a professional attorney who cannot defend your case in court. And that's the
Right.
analogy I think that you're making.
For a long time, the Armenian American community has invested a lot in activism and advocacy, right? Community organizations, demonstrations, protests. The Armenian cause would be greatly elevated if professional lobbying were also added as a resource. Again, I'm not saying it's one or the other. I think both should be utilized, and by using both, I think that could further causes that Armenians care about.
Right. Okay, Mr. Gerasoulis, my next question is actually a number of questions. However, they are interrelated. So in case you miss one, I'll repeat it again. And this is for us to better understand Armenians' representation in Washington, D.C. And you may answer them in any order that you prefer. So here they are. How common is it for foreign interests to hire lobbying firms such as TLG? Second question, when we say foreign interests, do we understand foreign governments or NGOs? And the third question is, do foreign governments hire lobbying firms directly, or is it done through proxies such as diasporan organizations? And the last question in this series, so to speak, to your knowledge, does the Armenian government have a lobbying relationship in the U.S.?
Those are excellent questions. So let me answer them one by one. It is extremely common for foreign interests to hire lobbying firms here in Washington. Most commonly is foreign governments. Many foreign governments in Washington have lobbying firms, and the way it usually works is a foreign government, through their Ministry of Foreign Affairs and their embassy in Washington, D.C., retains a lobbying firm and has that lobbying firm work with the embassy to advance their interests. There are occasions where a foreign government can hire a lobbying firm through a different branch, let's say their Ministry of Defense and so on, but it's usually done through their Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It also happens that other foreign interests, like foreign political parties, NGOs, also hire lobbying firms here in Washington. That is not uncommon. So there are other foreign political parties in other countries that have lobbying firms in Washington. And this is something that's extremely common. And in terms of your other question, in terms of regarding the Armenian government does not have lobbying representation in Washington. All this information is public information, because when a foreign government hires a lobbying firm, it needs to be registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. That information becomes public with the Department of Justice. So the Armenian government never used professional lobbying firms. The only time that they used a lobbying firm was for 1 month in October 2020. It was a 1-month agreement with a law firm connected to former Senator Bob Dole. So there was only one time where the Armenian government hired a lobbying firm, and frankly, it wasn't a serious effort. You know, a 1-month agreement is not a long-term undertaking. So I don't even really count that. So the Armenian government has really never undergone any sort of professional lobbying campaign, has not used lobbying firms in an extensive fashion. And this is something that's actually relatively unusual. Most governments or most countries have at some point used lobbying firms. So it's really the norm. And it's actually more the exception if you have countries that have never used lobbying firms. And you know, that's the case for the Armenian government.
So as a follow-up question to, after your clarification that usually the governments hire lobbying firms directly through their foreign ministry or through the embassy. And since Armenia has not done that, to the best of our knowledge, as you mentioned, only 1 month back in, I guess, was it 90s or 2000s with Bob Dole's firm, and taking also into consideration that Armenia has put on this face that they are moving closer to the West and that they're trying to create relations with the United States. Don't you find it peculiar that if the government of Armenia wants to have better relations with the US, that they would hire a lobbying firm in order to present their interests to the US government?
You're definitely correct. If the Armenian government wanted higher level relations with the United States, a lobbying firm would play a very important role in that regard. So yes, it is noticeable that lobbying firms continue to not be utilized by the Armenian government, and I think that's a very well taken observation. Also, just something for your audience that I want to clarify. Sometimes people have the misconception of, well, we don't have the resources to hire lobbying firms or lobbyists, and that's a complete misconception. Some of the poorest countries in Washington, D.C. have major lobbying firms. It's not just a case where, rich countries have lobbying firms. All countries, from the richest to the poorest countries in Washington, have lobbying firms. Let me give your audience a specific example.
Right.
One of the clients that my firm represented for a period of time was Democratic Republic of Congo, which is public information. The Congo is one of the world's poorest countries, and yet the Congolese government was spending at least several millions of dollars a year hiring multiple lobbying firms, including my firm, here in Washington, D.C. So it's not a question of money, it's a question of priorities.
Exactly.
So this whole concept of we don't have the money is an excuse. And in fact, I would say if the Armenian government can spend $6 million on a Snoop Dogg concert or $22 million on a new embassy in the UK, they could also spend money here in Washington. So that's an excuse. The same thing with the diaspora, too. The diaspora, especially in the United States, has plenty of resources. It's just that those resources are not directed in an organized fashion. For example, you had one of the major Armenian American entrepreneurs who spent $100 million creating a Hollywood movie a few years ago. With just a couple million of that 100 million, easily, if the Armenian American community felt like the Armenian government was not taking action, they have their own right to take action. A couple million of that 100 million could have easily been spent in Washington to hire lobbying firms to do things. So the resources are there. It's just a question of priorities. It's not a question of resources.
I was going to give the example of Snoop Dogg, but you took it away from me. So,
yeah.
So I'm left with my next question because you took my punchline. Anyway, Mr. Gerasulis, now it's in all good nature. My next question, Mr. Gerasulis, for our audience, I would like you to look at or answer the following. The United States has a unique system of government. And we know that it's probably not the biggest democracy, because India is probably the biggest democracy, but it's the oldest democracy, and it is a unique government. Can you explain how decision making, especially as it pertains to foreign policy, is undertaken? And what type of influence does each branch of government have on foreign policy? And the third aspect of this question, to what extent is public opinion influential in foreign policy decisions, and how is public opinion formulated in the United States?
Right. Those are all excellent questions. The United States has a unique system of government where we have separation of powers. the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch. They operate independently, but at the same time, they're connected. And this is very different from, let's say, in Armenia, where you have a parliamentary government, or in places like Greece, where you have a parliamentary government. In a parliamentary system, you could have, let's say, the leader of parliament, the prime minister. He goes up there and he says, "This is what I want," and then that's it. Everyone gets behind that decision. That's not how it works in the United States. We have different branches that operate independently. So, for example, let me give you a perfect example I think your audience will understand. The Biden administration wants to sell F-16 fighter jets to Turkey. The president has said it himself. Blinken has talked about it. Other people have talked about it
Right.
in the administration. But arms sales require the approval of Congress. And there has been widespread opposition in Congress to the sale of F-16s to Turkey. And Congress has the authority to approve or reject arms sales because Congress has the quote unquote the power of the purse. So Congress has made clear to the administration that they don't want to sell F-16s. Senator Bob Menendez placed a hold on the sale of F-16s, although granted, Mr. Menendez has stepped down as chairman of Senate Foreign Relations Committee due to his personal issues. So we have a case where the administration and the president of the United States himself wants something on foreign policy, but the Congress is stopping the administration, stopping the president of the United States, telling him no. And this might be surprising to, let's say, people in your audience who
Right.
might be used to a system where, let's say, the prime minister, whether it's Pashinyan, whether it's Kocharyan, whomever, says something, that's the law. That's not how it works in the United States. The president could have a desire to engage in foreign policy in a certain way, and the Congress can decide to block it. So we have a separation of powers where you have different entities that try to influence foreign policy. And as lobbyists, we try to influence those different entities. In the State Department, you have National Security Council, you have the State Department, you have the Congress. Also, I would like to say we have a fourth branch of government when it comes to think tanks, public policy centers. We try to influence those entities because those entities can influence Congress. If you think about the congressional hearings where you had people from the think tanks who provided testimony. So
Yes.
it's a very complicated dynamic here and with our system of government, but that also, and that means because we have such a complicated dynamic, you have thousands of people who have various levels of influence, and we try to influence those people as lobbyists. So, did I miss something?
Public opinion. If
Oh, yes,
public
public
opinion has
opinion, thank
influence on foreign policy, and how is the public opinion formulated in the United States?
Right. Public opinion can play an important role in determining the foreign policy decision of members of Congress, especially, but also more broadly. And public opinion can be influenced in the United States through the media, through social media, and so forth. And and that can influence the way certain U.S. government officials approach things, because especially for a member of Congress who's accountable to their people, their constituents, who has to be reelected, they don't want to take on positions that are unpopular. So, for example, with the Ukraine, right? I'm personally someone who supports, I'm speaking as an individual, supports the Ukrainians. I think we should give them as much support as we can. But at the same time, you have a growing segment of the United States population who has reservations about continuously sending money to Ukraine. A lot of people who are openly saying, why should we, give more resources to Ukraine when we can't defend our own border, for example. So this puts pressure on members of Congress where, on one hand, maybe they want to support Ukraine, but on the other hand, they don't want to get into trouble with their constituents. So if you have people in Armenia who have any frustrations about, hey, why is the United States not more supportive of the Ukraine? First of all, I do think the United States has been extremely supportive, but also it's important for the population to take into account, U.S. government can't do things unilaterally. If an issue becomes controversial, and you have constituents and people in the population who have mixed opinion of that issue, that makes it more complicated for a member of Congress. So public opinion plays a role, and members of Congress typically don't want to get involved in issues where they're on the opposite side of the people they represent as constituents. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, you did. But in your answer, you brought up the Turkey's F-16 program, and that brings up a question. With Turkey and Erdogan supporting Hamas, do you think the F-16 program is buried at this point?
Look, Turkey's always going to try to push it, but there's very widespread congressional opposition to the sale of F-16s to Turkey. Even if the NATO accession is ratified and Sweden is added, I still have serious doubts. I think I don't think this sale of F-16s to Turkey is going to go anywhere. I don't think the support's there in the Congress.
Yeah, it seems that way because the further Turkey goes, the deeper they go into this supporting of terrorism, and that's definitely going to be a no-no for any type of military support.
That's definitely true. And in fact, Senator Lindsey Graham, who has had kind of different viewpoints on Turkey over the years, he's even made a tweet attacking Turkey and calling their actions destabilizing for their support of Hamas and what they're saying about Israel and Palestine and so forth. So you're completely correct on that.
Yeah, coming back to our relationship with Livingston Group, please tell us what activities has the Livingston Group undertaken on behalf of NDA since the beginning of the relationship in March 2023, and what reactions have you received when lobbying on behalf of NDA, and have you encountered any unexpected reactions that have surprised you?
Thank you for those questions. We have engaged in a very comprehensive government relations program on behalf of NDA. We have reached out to people in Congress, the administration, the executive branch, the think tanks, in order to educate them about NDA, and we've done so in a very aggressive and proactive manner. Some of our results include the congressional hearings in the House of Representatives highlighting the plight of Nagorno-Karabakh. Also, as you alluded to previously, we had a very successful visit of Colonel Civilian in Washington in April. We are also engaged in legislation in Congress that strengthens U.S.-Armenia relations. And this is a big shift because previously the measures in Congress were really more, quote unquote, anti-Azerbaijan, right? Section 907 going after Azerbaijan. But we have measures now that actually promote bilateral relations between Armenia and the United States. And this is the first time this has ever happened. So we're engaged on those efforts. So our engagement and our lobbying has been very multifaceted. Regarding the reactions, Mr. Yunugian, I have to tell you that every week I get positive reactions in my engagement with U.S. officials. I've had so many nice things have been said about NDA, and NDA is really viewed as a breath of fresh air. So many people here in Washington are excited that you have a pro-Western group in Armenia, and I want your audience to know that. I think your audience would be surprised in terms of just how many supporters there are for NDA here in Washington, D.C., and the positivity, the positive reception that's been received. And one of the things that's been surprising to me is, the reactions I've gotten from people saying, this is something that's totally new for us, learning about the dynamics within Armenia and the fact that you have a pro-Western group. It's something that they've never heard of before. And typically, a lot of these members of Congress and congressional offices, they've been lobbied on when it comes to issues pertaining to Armenia are more symbolic issues like Armenian genocide, those types of issues. So to actually have a group that is talking about Armenia and the geostrategic implications of Armenia and moving it to the West, and us delivering that message, it's surprised a lot of people here in Washington, and it's really been a breath of fresh air for many officials. So I think your audience should know that there's a lot of support here in Washington. And also, let me clarify some things because I think this is important for your audience to hear. Look, I can understand if you have members of NDA who may want U.S. officials to be perhaps more open in their support of NDA, and that's a goal where we're trying to work towards. But at the same time, when you're dealing with U.S. government officials, and U.S. government officials are formulating their policies towards countries, let's say like Armenia, there's a certain amount of discretion involved. There are a lot of sensitivities involved. Like, for example, and I think this will be beneficial for your audience to know, whenever someone like myself has a meeting with the State Department, back in September, I met with then Assistant Secretary Yuri Kim and other officials, including the Deputy Assistant Secretary Josh Huck, and I briefed them about NDA. And Mr. Huck has recently had a high-profile visit in the Caucasus. When you have those meetings, you have to go through security. You have to give your phone away. Your phone is put in a secure place. You have to go into a soundproof room, and you have a discussion that's private. And it's up to the State Department officials whether or not they want to make the meeting public. Whether or not they want to tweet a photo of the meeting or so forth. These discussions are very sensitive, and these are not things that, a lot of these things are not talked about openly. But just because something is not talked about openly doesn't mean that the support's not there. So, I understand there can be some frustrations at some point, but, and again, we are trying to push for U.S. government officials to be more outspoken about their support for NDA in more explicit ways. But I just want to reassure your supporters and the NDA supporters that that there is very strong support here in Washington. And I thought that, I wanted to clarify this point for your audience.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. And for our audience, people who have ever been to the U.S. Embassy for a visa in Armenia would know that when you enter the U.S. Embassy, your phone is taken away from you. You can't take pictures, you can't record anything. So that's very common. So this way, as you explained, that when you meet someone from the State Department, you leave everything behind and that conversation is confidential. Now, my question to that explanation that you gave, when the individuals that you meet at the White House level or the State Department or any other department, and they do know that you represent NDA, and they do know that you are a representative of Livingston Group. And since they know that, any information that they tell you, does it preclude you from passing it on to your client, in this case, NDA?
Well, no. Well, it doesn't necessarily preclude us from sharing the information with our client. So if we meet with people in the White House, in the State Department, I think there's an understanding that the information that we gather can be shared with our client, but it's also made very clear that this is not something to be talked about openly.
Right.
Been briefed
limited audience that can hear it.
Right. So it's made clear to us as lobbyists, that, okay, of course you could share this information with your client, but under no circumstance can you or your client go on
and make
YouTube
it public
and talk about these things.
Right.
So
that's I want to make that distinction
again,
so our audiences can understand that NDA as a client has access to information that you have, but at certain information cannot be made public.
Right. And let me put it this way, if NDA were to go out and start openly talking about private conversations that Livingston Group has had, it will be considered a breach of confidentiality.
Exactly.
And
that will be the end of it.
U.S. government will be extremely upset with NDA, and probably the access will be cut off.
Completely.
It will be considered very unprofessional.
That's right. That's right. Clearly understood, Mr. Gressels. My next question, you actually answered or you mentioned parts of what I'm going to ask next in the previous question, but for clarity or to give a more detailed answer, please tell us, there are several legislative initiatives in Congress pertaining to U.S.-Armenia relations right now. Can you explain what they are, their significance, and how is NDA through TLG involved in those legislations?
Thank you. So there's several legislative initiatives in the Congress right now. Currently, you have the Supporting Armenians Against Azerbaijani Aggression Act of 2023. It's S-2900 in the Senate, House Resolution 5683 in the House. And this legislation not only holds Azerbaijan accountable, but establishes frameworks for U.S.-Armenia bilateral relations across a variety of sectors. And this includes foreign military financing in the amount of $10 million. And this is significant because for a very long time, the focus has solely been, it seems to me, here in Washington, amongst the diasporans, anti-Azerbaijan, anti-Turkey, rather than pro-U.S. Armenia. And so for the first time, we have legislation that not only holds Azerbaijan accountable as it should, but also has a constructive and positive agenda of pro-U.S. Armenia relations, foreign military financing. I mean, this is huge. This has never been done before or considered before.
Right.
We also have similar legislation from Congressman Chris Smith, H.R. 5686, Preventing Ethnic Cleansing and Atrocities in Nagorno-Karabakh Act of 2023. And it has a lot of similar language, but it has an even higher amount of foreign military financing for Armenia. So you have these two major pieces of legislation. In the case of Chris Smith, we have a very close relationship. We work with him to arrange those congressional hearings, and now we're working with him on this legislation. We're supporting both pieces of legislation, and we want to see what we can do to make sure that these bills, or at least parts of these bills, can go through the Congress. Because again, it's important for policymakers to know that we are not just anti-something, that we are pro-something. And in this case, we are pro-U.S.-Armenia relations. And this is significant because, again, it's important for your audience to understand that measures like these have never been done before. In the past, it's always been simply going after Azerbaijan. It's trying to sanction Azerbaijan. Nothing has been done in the past until now of this magnitude. So I just want to underscore the significance of this. Foreign military financing for Armenia from the United States, that's unprecedented. So look, it's not easy for bills to become law, and there's no guarantee that either of these bills will become law. However, the fact that they've simply been introduced, I think, is historic and significant. We are involved in both measures with both pieces of legislation. We are lobbying on behalf of both, and we think this is important, and then we think both bills are in line with the agenda of NDA.
Yes, and interesting that you note that this is the first time, at least in U.S.-Armenia relations, that there is a positive cooperation between U.S. and Armenia, rather than just blaming Azerbaijan or punishing Azerbaijan the way 907 act is supposed to do, is to punish them for by not giving them arms, or just being an accusatory legislation of the crimes that they have committed. Of course, that's important that we do that too, but as you mentioned, this is the first time that there's also a bilateral relationship building legislation that's being introduced. And to the best of my knowledge, at least it wasn't announced publicly by the Armenian government, they had nothing to do with this. Because if they did, they would have boasted about it and have said that through our efforts, this legislation was brought to the U.S. Congress. And the Armenian government has not done that. So we have to assume that they had nothing to do with this. What do you think?
I'm not aware of any announcements from the Armenian government. And I would think, if the Armenian government was involved, I don't know how the Armenian government works, but I assume they would put out a press release or something. I haven't seen anything.
At least a press release, but which wasn't done. Anyway, Mr. Gerasos, my next question and my last question is, I need you to provide a sense of scale for our listeners. What is the typical cost of foreign lobbying representation in Washington, D.C., and what could our compatriots do to support NDA's and TLG's efforts?
Well, thank you for that question. And I think it is critical for your audience to know what the scale is. Typically, when it comes to foreign lobbying, the scale is usually it ranges from the hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars when it comes to foreign lobbying representation. And also it depends on who the client is, whether the client is a foreign government, a foreign corporation, or a foreign association or NGO. So typically when it comes to foreign associations or NGOs, the average cost is usually a couple $100,000 per year in terms of the cost of lobbying. So for example, let's say $500,000 a year would be considered, average when it comes to, let's say, a foreign association, a foreign NGO hiring a lobbying firm in Washington. When it comes to a foreign government, typically it's, I would say, usually $1 million a year and up is considered normal. This is not considered, high. $1 million a year for foreign government is considered average. That could go up to much more. So in terms of clients that Livingston Group has represented, we've represented foreign governments that paid our firm as much as $2.5 million a year. So the costs for lobbying are significant. It takes a lot of resources. And so I think it would be helpful if NDA supporters could financially contribute to NDA in order to continue our lobbying efforts. We are extremely grateful for the support given so far by NDA supporters, but it's also important for your supporters to know the extent of the cost. This is not something that costs $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000. Again, it goes from a couple $100,000 a year into the millions. So, and that is exactly the amount of money that, again, that is usually spent. So I just wanted to provide that framework for your audience and make sure they have an understanding what the context is.
And with your permission, Mr. Gerasos, I would like to add that TLG, the Livingston Group, has been very supportive of NDA. And even though the costs are public information and anyone can go on a U.S. government site and find out, I'm not going to announce it. And thank you for you not announcing it either. We are TLG has discounted us quite a bit, and we are very appreciative of that. We realize what the costs are. We know what the costs are, and I just want to add one more thing that that a lot of foreign governments don't just hire one lobbying group, but they hire many. And Turkey's example is a good example because what Turkey has done in the past is that it hired everybody in Washington so that Armenians could not hire someone. So we were lucky in a way that we were able to hire the Livingston Group, which back in the early 2000, if I'm not mistaken,
That's correct.
yeah, was
Yeah.
hired by Turkey for a short period of time, and then they discontinued providing them services, the Livingston Group. And in a way, all those years, for 20 years or so, TLG was not involved with Turkey, and we were able to hire TLG, the Livingston Group, because they were available. So in a way, we were lucky that the relationship between TLG and Turkey was finished in the early 2000, which gave us the opportunity to cooperate with you. But I want our audience to know that Turkey has done everything that they could in order for this not to happen.
Right.
And I have to also mention that a lot of it is Mr. Gerasalos's efforts that we have been able to have this cooperation that's been ongoing for already a number of months. And at the end,
Right.
Mr. Gerasalos, if you don't have anything else to add, I'll just, as closing remarks, at the end of this video, there'll be information for our viewers on how they can support NDA in its lobbying efforts in Washington, D.C. There'll be a barcode that could be provided that they can scan. There'll be information in the description of the video where they can do it. And also, there is a website that you can go on, is ajbever.com. That's ajbever.com. And that's the website that you can go on and get information on how to support our lobbying efforts in Washington, D.C. And last word to you, Mr. Gerasalos, if
Yes,
you have
you
anything
actually
else to add.
highlighted something very important that I also want to clarify for your audience. And this actually goes back to your first question about the difference between a lobbying firm and an advocacy group. Lobbying firms are literally, we call ourselves sometimes guns for hire, right?
Right.
So, as you've mentioned, Turkey has hired many lobbying, Turkey's hired almost, I would say almost all the major lobbying firms in Washington at some point in the past 30 years, right? But, when it comes to lobbying firm, there are conflict of interest rules when it comes to, let's say, you can't represent Turkey and Armenia at the same time, right? But there's nothing that stops a lobbying firm from, let's say, after they disengage with the relationship with one country to then represent another country. It's actually very common in Washington. So, for example, I know of lobbying firms or lobbyists that represented Pakistan, and then later point they decide to take India as a client.
Exactly. It's like an attorney. An attorney can represent a criminal and also can represent a victim. Same attorney. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's understood.
Right. We are like a law firm in that respect.
Exactly.
So, for example, there have been lobbying firms that lobbied for Turkey that later on went to lobby for the government of Greece. And the reason why I want to highlight this is I think there's a misconception, because there are people who might not understand the distinction between lobbying firm, which is like a law firm, which is a gun for hire, and let's say an advocacy group. There might be confusion. I've noticed there's some confusion among some of the Armenians where they think, well, just because a lobbying firm at some point represented Turkey, therefore they are best friends with Turkey, they're in love with Turkey, or they hate Armenia or something. That's not true at all. That'll be like saying if you hire a lawyer, you're best friends with your lawyer. No, you hire someone to represent you for a certain period of time, and that person can then later on represent the other side. It works like a law firm. I mean,
exactly.
So it's important for your audience to understand that.
I understand it as an attorney and know that I can be on both sides of the issue. But unfortunately, a lot of lay people don't know, they don't understand the difference. And that's the reason why we spoke to you. And I think we have clarified a lot of the issues that were on people's minds that needed answers. Thank you, Mr. Gerasoulis, for this interview, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Looking forward to it. Thank you.